President Lee Jae-myung is stepping up efforts to fast-track his three flagship mega projects, with the president's office confirming the Southwest Semiconductor cluster will be built on the site of the Gwangju Military Airport. Korea has officially launched around-the-clock weekday trading in its foreign exchange market, marking a major step in its push to boost the global competitiveness of the Korean won. 11 days after Venezuela's devastating earthquakes, rescue efforts are giving way to recovery as authorities begin burying unidentified victims and shift their focus from searching for survivors to clearing debris and recovering bodies. President Lee Jae-myung has stressed the importance of speed in carrying out the nation's ambitious investment projects, calling for a faster administrative action. An airbase in the southwestern city of Gwangju has also been chosen as the site for a new chip cluster. Our Yoon Jung-min starts us off.
Speed will be the key to success amid fierce global competition. That was President Lee Jae-myung at a follow-up meeting on Monday with related agencies and private companies over the chip and AI mega projects announced last week.
누가 얼마나 더 빨리 선점하느냐, 누가 더 빠르냐로 결판이 나는 것 같습니다. 그야말로 오직 속도전이 중요하다 말씀을 다시 한번 드립니다.
The president instructed officials to consider allowing skipping an environmental impact assessment when investors seek to build facilities in an area where an assessment has been already made. He also called for the need to implement administrative procedures simultaneously, not in consecutive order, and to preemptively secure land, power, and water. The government has vowed full support using excess tax revenues recently generated from the chip sector.
이번이 기회입니다. 새로운 대한민국, 신대한민국의 출발점을 우리가 만들어내야 될 것입니다. 우리 앞에 놓인 이런 역사적 과제를 반드시 성공시킬 수 있도록.
On Monday, the Blue House announced that the Gwangju Air Base has been chosen as the site for a new chip cluster in the southwest, saying the location had been favored by companies.
The military airport in Gwangju covers about 8.3 million square meters of land available for use. The land has already been flattened, so the time for construction will be saved.
President Lee will personally preside over monthly meetings on the mega projects, while a dedicated task force will be set up at the presidential office. The president also pushed back against critics, saying it was contradictory to complain about discrimination against other areas over the selection of the investment sites, while claiming that the projects are impossible to be realized. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
President Lee Jae-myung and new Prime Minister Han Sung-suk held their first weekly meeting over lunch at the Blue House on Monday. According to the Prime Minister's office, the two discussed Han's four key priorities: accelerating the AI transition, streamlining regulations, fostering entrepreneurship, and expanding policies for young people. President Lee called on the new Prime Minister to drive innovation across the government, drawing on her decades of private sector experience in AI and information technology. The meeting is intended to share views on pending issues and coordinate policy responses between the Blue House and the cabinet. Korea has launched around-the-clock weekday trading in its foreign exchange market to boost the global appeal of the local capital market and the Korean won. Our Baek Joo-hee has more.
Korea officially launched a 24-hour foreign exchange trading system on Monday. Previously, $1 trading was strictly limited to just 6.5 hours a day, closing at 3:30 p.m. Under the new system, the trading now runs from 6 a.m. on Monday to 6 a.m. on Saturday, with trading available even on public holidays except for weekends and New Year's Day. On the first day of this new system, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Finance and Economy Gu Yoon-chol and Deputy Government of the Bank of Korea Kwon Min-soo visited the dealing room to offer encouragement. Minister Gu emphasized that the 24-hour market serves as a launching pad for the won's global leap. He noted the opening reflects strong confidence in Korea's economy, driven by record current account surpluses. The move also meets rising foreign demand ahead of the nation's inclusion in the World Government Bond Index. The government expects this new system to expand the investor base and attract long-term global capital. The system is also expected to enable local exporters to exchange currency in real time, protecting them from overnight financial shocks. Meanwhile, this reform comes as the nation battles persistent high exchange rates. In the second quarter of this year, the average $1 rate topped the 1,500 won mark for the first time since the Asian financial crisis, reaching 1,501.931. However, thin overnight trading volumes could spark initial volatility before the system fully stabilizes.
As the 24-hour market creates an environment where foreign capital flows and currency conversions can occur without limits, it appears highly likely that market volatility could increase significantly.
In response, Bank of Korea Deputy Governor Kwon pledged to strictly monitor the market around the clock and supply liquidity if necessary. To make local trading even easier for foreign markets, the government will introduce an offshore won settlement system by January 2027, so international banks can transfer the Korean won overseas. 백주희, Arirang News.
It's a crucial week for the semiconductor industry, as Samsung Electronics is set to release its second quarter preliminary earnings, while SK hynix prepares for its upcoming U.S. listing. Lee Ji-yeon has the details.
After weeks of volatility in global chip stocks, attention is turning to a series of major events this week that could prove pivotal for Korea's semiconductor industry. Samsung Electronics is set to announce its second quarter preliminary earnings on Tuesday. Later in the week, SK hynix will list its American Depository Receipts, or ADRs, in the U.S. on Friday, giving American investors easier access to the Korean chipmaker's shares. Taiwan's TSMC will also release its June revenue figures the same day. Samsung Electronics, the world's largest memory chip maker, is expected to report one of its strongest quarterly performances, supported by solid growth in its semiconductor business. According to market consensus, Samsung Electronics is expected to report an operating profit of about 56.4 billion US dollars, or 86 trillion Korean won for April to June quarter when it announces preliminary earnings on Tuesday. That will be well above its first quarter operating profit of roughly 37 billion US dollars, or 57.2 trillion won. On Friday, SK hynix will begin trading its American Depository Receipts, or ADRs, on the Nasdaq in a listing expected to raise up to 29 billion US dollars, or around 44 trillion Korean won. Although SK hynix is a major player in the high bandwidth memory, or HBM, market, its shares have so far been traded only in Korea, meaning overseas investors have had to trade during Korean market hours and deal with foreign exchange cost. The Nasdaq ADR listing is expected to address these challenges by making the stock more accessible to global investors. Meanwhile, the week's major chip-related events extend beyond Korea. Taiwan's TSMC is scheduled to release its June revenue figures on Friday, offering another important gauge of global semiconductor demand. Ahead of a key week for the semiconductor industry, Korea's benchmark KOSPI fluctuated around the 8,000 mark during Monday's trading session. The market closed at 8,051 as Samsung Electronics gained while SK hynix fell, leaving the two chip giants moving in opposite direction. Lee Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Gasoline prices at pumps across Korea have fallen into the 1,800 won range per liter, driven by the seventh round of fuel price caps and stabilizing global oil prices. According to the Korea National Oil Corporation, the nationwide average price of gasoline stood at 1,897.061 per liter as of 4 p.m. on Monday, while prices in Seoul reached 1,929.521 per liter. This marks the first time in more than 3 months that the national average has fallen below 1,900 won. Gasoline prices have stayed above the 2,000 won range for around 2 months due to tensions in the Middle East before gradually coming down. Diesel prices are also continuing to decline, with a nationwide average falling to 1,886.11 per liter. Now, in Seoul, diesel was recorded at 1,914.11 per liter. The search for survivors is winding down in Venezuela, where response efforts have entered a new phase 11 days after twin earthquakes devastated the country. Kim Do-yeon reports.
The death toll from Venezuela's twin earthquakes has reached 3,342 as of Sunday local time, marking one of the worst seismic disasters in Latin American history. 11 days after the June 24th double shocks, the focus on the ground has shifted from searching for survivors to debris removal and body recovery. International rescue operations are wrapping up, with only 25 of the original 77 foreign teams remaining as the United Nations hands over coordination control to local civil defense authorities. The scale of the destruction is immense, the authorities confirming 856 buildings are damaged, including 190 total collapses. In the hardest hit coastal region of La Guaira, officials buried 150 unidentified victims in individual graves on Sunday while families keep watch over collapsed structures. The government faces mounting public anger over what residents and international aid organizations describe as a slow and inadequate initial response. Speaking at an Independence Day military ceremony in Caracas, interim President Delcy Rodriguez pushed back against critics and dismissed warnings of potential civil unrest. To handle the logistical crisis, Rodriguez ordered newly graduating military ensigns to deploy directly to temporary shelters and medical facilities in La Guaira. She also announced a permanent structural change to the military's role in domestic disasters, ordering the immediate creation of a specialized task force.
I have instructed the Ministry of Defense to create a special emergency task force to respond to disasters of this nature, which will be named after Grand Marshal of Ayacucho, Antonio José de Sucre.
The task force faces a catastrophic recovery landscape. In the Carabayeda district of La Guaira alone, officials estimate the disaster generated 1.25 million metric tons of debris. While the official figures record 16,470 people injured and 17,345 homeless, the actual toll is expected to rise sharply. Unofficial citizen-run tracking networks still list more than 31,000 people as missing. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO Summit, will be held in Ankara, Turkey this Tuesday. Amid growing tensions between the U.S. and its European allies, the alliance's unity will be put to the test. Hong Seo-jung has more.
Leaders from NATO's 32 member states will gather in the capital of Turkey this week to discuss key issues, including defense spending and the Ukraine war against Russia. The White House says U.S. President Donald Trump will arrive on Tuesday and is scheduled to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on Wednesday. Growing tensions between the U.S. and its NATO allies have fueled concerns over Washington's commitment to the alliance, casting doubts on what the summit can ultimately achieve.
I just want loyalty. You know, we're so loyal to them. We're always fighting for them. We have thousands of troops all over Europe. In Germany, we have 50,000 troops.
According to a U.S. official familiar with the matter, AP reports that Trump and Zelensky's discussion on Wednesday will address efforts to end the war in Ukraine. Following the meeting, Trump is expected to speak with Russian President Vladimir Putin to explore a possible path toward achieving peace. Another key issue on the agenda is defense spending. Washington has repeatedly criticized European allies for failing to meet NATO's defense spending target. However, the European allies have pushed back, pointing to what they call the Trump trillion, a chart showing that NATO allies and Canada have committed more than $1.2 trillion in additional defense spending since 2017. Tensions within the alliance have deepened further as the European members have been reluctant to back the United States during the recent US-Iran conflict. In response, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has highlighted Europe's growing contribution to the alliance, with a backlog of more than $300 billion in defense orders and as many as 5,000 U.S. military aircraft operating from bases in Europe ahead of the ceasefire in April. Still, Trump has repeatedly threatened to withdraw the U.S. from NATO and reduce the number of American troops and military assets stationed in Europe, raising questions about the alliance's unity. With key issues such as defense spending and the war in Ukraine high on the agenda, this year's NATO Summit is expected to put the alliance's unity to the test. Hong Seo-jung, Arirang News.
The Rim of the Pacific, the world's largest international maritime warfare drill, is ongoing around the Hawaiian Islands. And the addition is all the more significant to the ROK Navy, which has taken the role of the Combined Force Maritime Components Commander. Our Kim Bo-kyung follows this report from Hawaii.
Naval forces from 30 nations convened around the Hawaiian Islands, advancing towards a shared vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific region. They came together for the Rim of the Pacific, the world's largest multinational maritime military training event. Marking its 30th edition this year, RIMPAC features 30 surface ships, 5 submarines, around 200 aircraft, and 30,000 personnel. On board the USS Essex of the U.S. Amphibious Fleet, one task force commander highlighted the importance of the drill, underlining that the region constitutes nearly 2/3 of the world's economy and is home to over half of the world's population.
And by integrating our forces, we ensure our collective ability to deter aggression, prevent coercion, and protect the global supply chains and lines of communications that help sustain our interconnected economies and our continued prosperity.
This year's RIMPAC exercise is all the more meaningful to the ROK Navy as Korea assumed the role of Combined Force Maritime Component Commander. Dubbed the Fortress on the Sea, the Navy's most advanced Aegis destroyer, the ROK's Cheongjo the Great, is making its RIMPAC debut as the South Korean Navy makes history as the first from Asia to command the exercise's Maritime Task Force. Taking part in simulated air defense warfare training, the crew in the warship's command and control center shot down incoming enemy missiles with SM-2 surface-to-air missiles. ROK's Cheongjo the Great is not the only core asset from Korea that's taking part in the drill. The ROK's Dosan Anchang-ho is docked at Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickam in Hawaii. The country's 3,000-ton submarine sailed across the Pacific before joining RIMPAC after completing a combined naval exercise with Canada in early June.
With some of our finest assets here, our multinational partners can see how far the ROK Navy has advanced. Serving as the Combined Force Maritime Component Commander, I can also see how much the Navy's global stature has grown.
With state-of-the-art assets in place, the ROK Navy will continue to demonstrate its capabilities as RIMPAC continues through July 31st. Kim Bo-kyung, Arirang News, Honolulu.
Time now to take a look at what's been happening in the world of sports. For that, we have our sports editor, Paul Nietzsche, joining us in the studio. Welcome back, Paul.
Hello, thank you.
Paul, I understand the Korea Football Association chief has stepped down eventually.
Right, yes, Jong Mong-gyu has announced his resignation. He did that today.
Right.
As reported by Yonhap, the KFA said Monday that Jong has submitted his formal resignation letter earlier today. In a statement, he said that he shoulders major responsibility, but that he had pursued nothing but development and glory for Korean football. At the end of May, Chung announced his intention to step down after the World Cup. He'd been in charge since January 2013. Meanwhile, it was announced on Friday that Korean football legend Park Ji-sung will co-head a new government-formed committee to reform Korean football. The new head coach search will begin when the application window opens on August the 26th.
Well, speaking of the World Cup, it's been one of some surprise results, hasn't it?
Yes, some upsets and some very near misses for some of the tournament favourites. Cape Verde pushed holders Argentina extremely close to an upset on Friday in the round of 32. The World Cup debutants took Messi and company to extra time following a 1-1 draw, coming back from behind twice. Argentina eventually won 3-2. But Brazil, one of the favourites, were unable to avoid an upset, losing 2-1 to Norway in the round of 16 on Sunday. Co-host Mexico were knocked out by England on Sunday in the round of 16. Despite the altitude of Mexico City dominating much of the build-up, England won 3-2 to reach the quarters and will face Norway. In other news, USA forward Folarin Balogun has had his red card suspension lifted following calls made to FIFA from President Trump. Balogun was shown a red card against Bosnia and Herzegovina for serious foul play following a VAR review. Belgium, who USA play next, have released a scathing statement to express astonishment, saying the decision is a direct violation of FIFA's own rules. They'll be able to appeal.
Well, controversial. Sticking with football, the K-League season resumed over the weekend. Tell us more.
It did, and there were some upsets in the K-League as well, but not at Sangam, where FC Seoul earned a 1-0 win over Incheon United. Jong Sung-won's goal 9 minutes from time moved Seoul 8 points clear at the top of the table, with Seoul aiming for a first K-League title in 10 years. The surprise came in Jeonju. Reigning champions Jeonbuk Hyundai Motors lost 2-1 at home to Gangwon. Elsewhere, Daejeon remain looking for a first home win of the season following a 2-2 draw with top-flight newcomers Bucheon FC 1995. Pohang Steelers came back from behind to beat FC Anyang 3-2 despite being a man down. Gwangju FC versus Ulsan HD and Gimcheon Sangmu versus Jeju SK both ended 1-1.
I see. And finally, to baseball, what can you tell us about Koreans in MLB?
Well, there's been some hitting streaks extended and some losing streaks coming to an end. Lee Jung-hoo of the San Francisco Giants on Sunday extended his hitting streak to 4 games with a clutch 2-out single in the 9th inning. He finished 1 for 5, but the Giants lost 7-6 to the Colorado Rockies. Meanwhile, Song Sung-moon helped the San Diego Padres snap an 8-game losing streak by going 1 for 3 with a walk, 2 stolen bases, a run scored, and several standout defensive plays in a 5-2 win over the Los Angeles Dodgers. But Kim Ah-sung of the Atlanta Braves has been placed on the injured list for 10 days due to a finger issue. And US media outlets are reporting that Go Woo-seok has been traded to the Minnesota Twins from the Detroit Tigers.
Alrighty, Paul. Thanks for that as always. I'll see you next Monday.
Yeah, thank you.
Tomorrow, muggy conditions will continue across inland areas nationwide. Feels like highs will climb above 33 degrees Celsius in parts of the central and southern regions and top out 31 degrees elsewhere. As muggy weather continues, heat advisories are in effect for parts of the central and southern regions. Meanwhile, more rain is on the way nationwide tomorrow. The heaviest rainfall will likely target northern Gyeonggi-do and northern Gangwon-do provinces, where some places could see more than 80 millimeters of rain. Typhoon Bobby, the 9th named storm of the season, is strengthening over waters near Guam and continues to move north. There is still a chance it could affect Korea, so be sure to keep an eye on the latest forecast. Tomorrow's Seoul will start the day at 24 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon 22, Busan 23 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 30 degrees, Daegu 33, Jeju 31 degrees. Looking ahead, get ready for a week of alternating rain and muggy summer weather. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Dami. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
Across borders, surging forward without limits, Korea. Korean culture has moved beyond a passing trend, becoming a force that colors the world. And perhaps its origins trace much further back into our own history. The true roots where this vast chronicle began, where the essence of K-power and the spirit of our people are recorded. In the 17 seconds you casually pass by, thousands of years are breathing within. The moment your gaze lingers, and your curiosity is stirred, the radiant faces of our history begin to awaken. The real stories of these artifacts, stories we never knew. It begins here, now.
When did it all begin? The beginning of joy embedded in daily life, where steps of learning meet a bigger world, and history coexists. The legend continues. Innovative technologies come together to unfold a new future, building a better tomorrow. A joy accessible to all, always present in your daily life. JDC.
Knock knock. The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Pony Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Cabion by your side, you can become a Cabion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gyeon. The political fallout from Iran's leadership transition is continuing to unfold as funeral ceremonies continue for former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. Anti-U.S. sentiment has intensified, with crowds openly calling for retaliation against President Trump. Now, at the same time, attention is focused on who will succeed Khamenei, while signs are also emerging that Tehran may be looking to revive diplomacy and trade behind the scenes. Meanwhile, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing back against reports of tensions with Washington, insisting the two allies remain aligned on Iran. So where is this crisis heading, and what can we expect from the next round of U.S.-Iran talks? For more on this, we are joined in the studio by Min Jung-hoon, professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy. A very big welcome.
My pleasure always.
And also joining us online is Robert Lawrence, professor of English and Turkic Studies at Dongduk Women's University. Good to see you.
Great to see you too. Thank you for having me on.
So, Professor Lawrence, let's begin right away. Like I've said, Iran has begun state funeral ceremonies for former Supreme Leader Khamenei. What does this funeral mean for Iran politically and socially?
There's a great deal of messaging going on for both international and domestic audiences in these carefully orchestrated series of ceremonies. You know, whether that be the delegations coming from overseas on the first day, or the public farewell at the Grand Mosala in Tehran over the last couple days, or the procession through Tehran we saw earlier on today. You know, its significance for Iranian society truly depends on who you ask. You know, those who don't particularly care for the post-1979 Iranian government, given the late leader's proclivity for, to take heavy-handed approaches to domestic opposition, they likely don't have much sympathy for the martyrdom or victimhood narrative. They likely see this as a misuse of public funds that could be spent, to ease people's economic hardships, and they don't particularly care for being, having their businesses forced to be closed for the events. On the other hand, for the government and its supporters, this is an opportunity to publicly mourn. They're showing defiance, they're showing strength, and continuity. They chose "We Must Rise" as the theme for the proceedings. And it's usually written alongside a picture of the late Supreme Leader's clenched fist. Additionally, we're seeing these red flags with messages that some of them explicitly ask for or call for revenge, and others are messages that evoke the death of the Prophet Muhammad's grandson, Hussein, who's a very important figure in Shia Islam. In fact, they erected a statue of the late leader's clenched fist, and they released a picture of his coffin draped in a red flag that said, "Ya Hussein." This kind of elicits the idea of avenging an unjust killing because of historical events that happened in 680 AD in Karbala, where Imam Hussein was unjustly killed along with his family. So, the government is trying to project strength. It's showing that it's defiant and that there's continuity and unity within the government. But it's also trying to align the plight of the late Ayatollah Khamenei and the grandson of the Prophet, Hussein. This is kind of an appeal for pan-Shia support and solidarity. So there are a lot of cultural and religious symbolism. There's a lot of symbolism that's kind of carrying over to the political sphere.
So different opinions from various sides. Now, if we stay with the funeral, Professor Min, it also coincides with the 250th anniversary of the American independence. What do you make of the timing and the message from Iran?
Well, personally, I think that Iran could consider various things to schedule the state funeral. And it seems that one of the factors is that Iran wanted to utilize the funeral as a political event to mobilize the support of its people by emphasizing anti-Americanism. And I think that's why the funeral began on the 250th anniversary of American Independence Day. And it was reported by the media that Iranian people who came out to the funeral shouted the slogans like "Death to America," "Death to Israel," "Death to assassin," and interestingly, "Death to those who oppose the regime." So these slogans and atmosphere at the funeral suggest that Iranian government aims to elevate the supreme leader's death to that of a holy martyr who passed away to defend the country and tried to inspire its people to fight against the United States and strengthen support for the regime. So personally, I think it seems that the funeral will contribute the Iranian people to maintaining their support for their government for some time, but I don't think that the effect will last long. That's mainly because Iranian people's support for their government will eventually depend on whether Iran could make a successful deal with the U.S. and get out of the economic hardship that they had to tolerate. So we'll see whether or not Iran would make a successful deal with the U.S. instead of delaying the ongoing negotiations.
Right, of course. The deal itself would be much more important. But when we go back to the funeral itself, Professor Lawrence, Iranian officials say up to 20 million people are expected to take part, with the procession planned to continue through Iraq before the burial on July 9th. Is this kind of mass funeral typical in Iran, or does it carry a broader meaning?
No, so this isn't a normal funeral at all. The scale is going to be difficult to interpret, I think, because objective data is going to be likely difficult to ascertain, and there are already reports indicating compulsory participation. The route itself, I think, is interesting and likely multidimensional in its objectives. Right? Religiously, the cities of Qom, Najaf, Karbala, and Mashhad are all important to Shia Islam. Tomorrow there will be a funeral procession in Qom, which is a major center of learning for Shia Islam. But it's also home to the major seminaries that kind of compose the theological authority of the state. Next, they'll be flown to Najaf in Iraq, where there'll be a procession in both Najaf and Karbala. So Najaf is an important place in Shia Islam as well, because it's the resting place of Imam Ali. So you have the Imam Ali shrine there. He's the first Shia Imam in 12er Shiism. He's also the son-in-law and cousin of the Prophet Muhammad and the father of Hussein. So down the road a little bit, approximately 70 kilometers, I think, you also have Karbala, which is the next location. They'll have a procession there near the Imam Hussein shrine, Imam Hussein shrine. And he's, like I said, the grandson of the Prophet and the third Shia Imam. So both of these shrines are some of the most important places in Shia Islam, and they're important pilgrimage sites as well. This is happening on the back end of Muharram as well. So Muharram is the first month in the Islamic calendar, but it's also when Shia Muslims, mourn the passing of Hussein for the first 10 days of the month. And this just finished up about a week and a half ago. So these two are combining in a very intentional way. Now, when he leaves Iraq, they'll go back to his hometown of Mashhad in northeastern Iran, where he'll be laid to rest at the Imam Reza shrine. And Imam Reza was the 8th Imam in 12er Islam. So all of these, you're covering a lot of very important religious ground here, cultural ground, that can serve as a unifying force for the public as well. Politically, the trip to Iraq is a little bit more touchy. You know, there's intense competition right now for influence in Iraq between the U.S. and Iran. And there are reports that some Iraqi officials are very hesitant to allow any events that carry implications beyond, you know, the religious character, while others are welcoming, you know, the deepening of ties between Iran and Iraq. So how the Iraqi leg of the trip proceeds, I think, is going to be watched pretty closely by everybody who observes the region.
So the scale and format of the funeral may also be sending a big political message as well. But Professor Min, reports actually say that U.S. President, the United States, has urged some countries not to send delegations to the funeral, of course, causing several to withdraw or hold their participation. Why is Washington taking these kinds of stands?
Well, I think that U.S. is going through a tough end of war negotiations with Iran nowadays. Although the two countries agreed to have 60 days for the negotiations, but it seems that it was not easy to make progress. For Washington, I think it was expected that along with the issue of opening the Strait of Hormuz, the two countries would talk about how to reduce Iran's nuclear capabilities and what corresponding measures U.S. would offer during the negotiations. But they could not talk about the agenda so far, and instead they are still locked in a power struggle just over the issue of opening the Strait of Hormuz. So it shows that the two countries, U.S. and Iran, still try to increase their bargaining power in the early stage of the negotiations, instead of making concessions to move forward for the deal. So, personally, I think Iran appears to believe that time is on its side, and it just sticks to its claims and tries to delay their negotiations. So such a situation shows why U.S. pushes countries diplomatically not to attend their funeral. They are not ready to make concessions to move forward. Instead, they are just in the power struggle in the early stage of the negotiations. But I also think that Iran needed to realize that the war is fading away from U.S. voters' minds because the oil prices is falling in the United States, and the U.S. media are getting pay more attention to the upcoming midterm elections and other domestic agendas. So it means that the Iran war is becoming a forgotten war to the U.S. voters' minds and the other people across the world. So Iran needs to ask itself, which country want to obtain from a deal more between the two, and is time still on Iran's side after oil prices are getting more stable. So otherwise, Iran would get in trouble because it can get out of the negotiation with empty hands.
So as you've mentioned, it's kind of a power struggle still going on, strong action from the U.S. And like we've touched upon, there's voices in Iran like saying death to America, also a very strong stance. How could the U.S. actually view this, and how concerned should we be about if further clashes, possibly during the funeral period itself?
Well, personally, I think there's such provocative slogans that could be uncomfortable to Washington, but it is unlikely that U.S. would have a surprise attack or the make further clashes during the funeral period because Washington want to maintain the negotiations. So if U.S. attacks and they would be victims on Iran's side during the period, it would be very difficult to continue to the negotiations. And recently, President Trump mentioned that during a media interview that he was watching the funeral and one shot would take them all away at the funeral. But U.S. would not do that because U.S. would not have anyone to negotiate with after the strike. So I think it shows clearly that U.S. want to remain in the negotiations and manage the situation, although it could be uncomfortable with what is happening in Iran right now. So I expect that the negotiations will continue to go on, although Washington feels uncomfortable about what the Iranian people government are talking about the United States and other things. But still, the U.S. want to maintain the negotiations.
Willingness to negotiate still stays. Now, turning to Iran's leadership then, another key question is whether Mujtaba Khamenei, widely seen as a possible successor, will appear at the funeral. Professor Lawrence, why has this attendance remained uncertain?
There's an abundance of speculation as to why he's not showing up. Some think that since we haven't really seen him since the beginning of Epic Fury, that he's no longer with us. Others think that he might be so severely injured that he's not able to make public appearances. A lot of it's pure speculation. We really don't know much. What we do know is 3 of his brothers showed up at the funeral alongside General Vahidi, who's head of the IRGC, Brigadier General Khani, who's head of the Quds Force, and then delegations from Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis from Yemen. They all attended the first day's official ceremony. So, a lot of these people haven't really been out in public much in the last few months because of security risks. So a lot of people are asking, if they could show their face in public, then why can't Mojtaba Khamenei? The answer to that question is probably known by a select small group of people. But one simple explanation is that he's explicitly been threatened by Israel. The Israeli defense minister, I think last week, Minister Katz said that he was marked for death. And then he kind of doubled down on that comment earlier on today and actually expanded the scope of the comment. So assuming that he is healthy, given the Israeli success in assassinating high-value targets since October 7th, I think it's logical to assume that the security threat plays a significant role in the decision for him not to come to the funeral so far.
Now, Professor Lawrence, if we look beyond the funeral, Iran is still facing economic hardship, public frustration, and an unresolved succession as well. How stable is the regime going forward?
Well, this is kind of complicated due to the internet blackout and kind of the unreliability of polling data that comes out of Iran. Between economic failure over decades and what happened in January to protesters, there's certainly a considerable portion of the country that does not support the previous nor the current leadership of the country. Now, the size of that portion is heavily debated, and I would argue that it's based largely on speculation and incomplete data. So it's tough to really be certain. But, within the ranks of the new leadership, there's been some jockeying for position, and I think a lot of people have blown this out of proportion. Iran's always had competing factions within its upper tiers of government. But one thing they don't really argue much about is the primacy of regime security. And, to put this into context, the Islamic Republic of Iran has a massive security apparatus, upwards of 1 million people when you combine all forces. And when you factor in their decentralization strategy known as mosaic defense, they have forces in all 31 provinces and then down to the county and down into the neighborhood level. These forces are designed to absorb strategic decapitation, to prolong war, and to suppress any domestic insurrection. So as we saw in January, and in multiple protest movements over decades, the state is willing and able to do whatever it has to do to maintain regime security. So, despite any presumed deficit in popularity that's difficult to quantify, I still think that destabilizing the current government is a pretty tall task. They're still very well armed. There are a lot of them, and basically the population isn't armed. And that's a very asymmetric reality there.
Right, and ultimately the bigger question will be what comes after the funeral. Now, if we turn to diplomacy, Professor Min, the New York Times reported that Israel considered targeting senior Iranian negotiators during ceasefire talks. Do you think this suggests there's some differences between the U.S. and Israel's stance over Iran?
Yes, and as you know, it was expected that Israel would be one of the main hurdles that U.S. needed to take control to make progress in the negotiations. And it was known that Israel perceived the war as a lifetime opportunity that it had dreamed of for decades. So with the help of U.S., more precisely with the help of President Trump, Israel tried to reduce the military capabilities of Iran and its friends like Hamas and Hezbollah. But unlike Israel's expectations, U.S. President Trump wanted to end the war, although Iran still keeps its nuclear and missile capabilities and imposes a security threat to Israel. So with the ground that Hezbollah is still an immediate security threat to the country, Israel has not taken the troops back from Lebanon and conducted military attacks again and again. And the same logic can be applied to the media report that Israel planned to kill the Iranian delegation that was negotiating with the U.S. So Washington may be uncomfortable with what Israel has been doing, but U.S. does not want to see a situation where U.S.-Israel relations would get worse because Israel is still an important and core ally in the Middle East. So it is likely that U.S. maintain a control over Israel in terms of the ongoing negotiations with Iran, and also tries to improve its overall relations with Israel or restore its relations with Israel. And the upcoming summit between U.S. and Israel will be the event that will reaffirm the close relations between the two countries.
So that everyone's going to look closely into that. So follow-up negotiations are expected to resume after the funeral, with the Pakistani mediation playing a big role. Professor Lawrence, what will be the key issues there, and do you see any chance of a breakthrough?
Well, there's still major hurdles and pretty vast distances to bridge between the two sides. You know, despite the MOU, there seems to be a distinct deficit in understanding. You know, the two sides still differ on traffic through the Straits of Hormuz, the release of frozen assets and sanctions relief, the highly enriched uranium, support for regional proxies, Iran's nuclear program, and both sides are claiming that the other is violating the MOU, and they probably both have fairly good claims on that. So I think, like Dr. Min said earlier on, yeah, I think Iran's strategically trying to extend these negotiations. It believes that time is on its side. I'm not so sure that that's the truth right now, actually. But you know, either way, given the distrust between the two states, it's almost impossible to underestimate how much they distrust each other. So I hate to sound pessimistic, but I don't have a particularly optimistic view of what's about to happen next. I don't expect on the 11th that there'll be any major breakthroughs. And seeing what's happened so far, if there is a breakthrough, I have a feeling a week later they're going to be arguing about what that breakthrough was.
Well, it's always great to have various opinions on the show. So we will closely be watching to see whether diplomacy can finally gain some momentum moving forward. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Lawrence.
Thank you for having me on.
And of course, Professor Min, we really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame tonight. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Till then, stay informed and engaged.